What
Sweet.
up?
Hi, welcome to WTUFO. Rebranding. It used to be UFO Holding Space. Before that, it was just Holding Space. Now it's WTUFO. It sums up our casual, devil-may-care attitude and our reckless curiosity about this wild subject, which is that UFOs are real, and we're going to talk about it. I'm Caleb Mayo, and this is my brother John.
Hey there.
And today we're going to talk about talking to friends about UFOs, which, if you're into UFOs, you know is a fraught topic. So, John, why don't you explain a little bit about what we're thinking here?
Man, I was at a dinner party a few months ago, and somebody who knew I was into UFOs teed me up with John's really into UFOs. Why don't you tell us about it, John? And it was harrowing, and I really choked, I feel, and I had 10 people listening to me for a minute, and I think I probably alienated all of them and didn't convince anybody to be more curious about this subject. It's something that's really hard to talk about. I personally find it challenging. I know you do too, Caleb. And so I'm excited to unpack it a little bit, talk about what makes it so difficult, and hopefully land on some good ideas for how we can do this better. Does that sound all right to you?
Yeah, that sounds great. As a background piece of information, I have a dog in my room. I have two dogs in my room, and one of them is very young, so he might squeak things or bite me.
Show the dog. Now you have to show the dog.
Now you have to show. Messy in here. All right, you're right. I do have to show the dog. That's the
Yep,
adorable dog. He's destroying a spray bottle because he was trying to eat wires, and I stopped him from doing it. Okay, just quick preamble on a little other unrelated intro. The floor is wet now. We both found this app from an Economist article this week, and we thought it was really cool. It's by Enigma Labs. I actually don't remember what it's called. Do you remember what it's called? The Android version is called UFO Sightings. It's not an Enigma Labs product, but it also has a map. And the Enigma Labs version,
it's just called Enigma on Apple on the iPhone, and It's got a kind of cool little icon that looks like the gimbal video. It's like lock brackets on it. Anyways, yeah. So you downloaded this yesterday. Have you played around with it much?
I downloaded the Genki ripoff Android version, which is not by the same company, and played around with it a little bit. And what's very cool about it is that you could just see right off the bat that there are thousands of sightings. You can see they're all over the world, and you can zoom in on your area and see information back as far as at least the early thousands about what people saw, and in some cases photos and video. You said you also ran out and did that in your area.
It's pretty amazing. I'm sorry you only have the janky one, but I live in Altadena, California, which is a little town outside LA, and I open it up and there are 12 sightings, and I just picked one at random, and it was a very detailed, very well written sighting that somebody had taken a lot of time and effort, and there were 4 videos and some stills attached with it also about a sighting over the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which happens to be down the street from my house, with a shimmering silver cigar-shaped object with multicolored lights, and then several smaller objects. It was a lot of the sort of trans shape ones that'll be circles, and then they're cubes, and then it's triangular for a minute, and then it's spherical again. But so I don't know, whatever. This is not an app that I think you would turn over to somebody who you're just talking to about UFOs for the first time, because it's it's a lot of who knows who's making these reports. But I was pretty blown away by just the few reports I looked at, and also just the complexity and polish of the interface. It's pretty robust app. So good find, man. I'm glad you sent that to me.
That's very cool. And it's also cool that The Economist covered it relatively dryly with very little snark.
Loved how boring that Economist article was. Yeah, it's great.
Appreciated also that they put the whole Arrow report in a parentheses. Liked that. Just one little line in parentheses about oh, by the way, the Pentagon says this is bullshit. But anyway, back to the story.
Oh, that's great.
I think they maybe said Little Green Men once, but that was the only time. It's not an eye rolly article. And I think they appreciated what other people might about this app, which is just that it's data. It's just raw information about what people have seen. Because, and maybe this is a good transition, if there's one rock hard, indisputable, mutually agreeable fact around UFOs, it's that people see them. So people see something is a good place to start, because that is something that everyone agrees is true. There's no, you're not going out on any limbs. You don't have to send anybody a link or like cite a historical source. We all know that people see them. And then if they're new to the subject, they probably don't know how many people see them. And this is fuzzy, but it's like at least 5,000 a year in America. Richard Dolan thinks it's probably like 50,000 real sightings globally a year. But it could be as many as 100,000. We don't really know. It's a lot, though. And that's an early thing that people don't know. So tiptoeing into this. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And then just off of that, I would say then the next thing that you want people to know is that is like the kinds of people who see them. And because what I encounter a lot is the like, but all those people are crazy. And even like Stephen Hawking said that basically in like one of the like quotes I found about him.
Yeah.
Like, interesting, they only talk to rednecks and fucking morons, huh? But like, no, that's not true at all.
Yeah, and the Economist article has some data about that. They break down the people who self-reported one profession in this app as mostly veterans, and then I think law enforcement is also really high up on that list. I don't remember, there was something in between there, but again, to your point, it's like often quite serious people. Oh, pilots is big. People who have like jobs that involve looking at things in the sky or looking for unusual stuff, or like relating to military craft seem to be like extra likely to notice and report things like this. So do you want to sort of start with a discussion of how this has gone so far for us? Like, would you like to talk about how it's been to talk to friends about this?
Yeah, I think that would be a fun way to start. I'll try to, I don't know, I'll just give general top line thoughts. It's been pretty challenging. I think it's challenging on two levels, I think is where I feel it. One is the actual like communicating to people that there's something going on here that's worthy of their attention. I think I struggle to do that, I think. Like to convince people. And then I also struggle to like feel okay while I'm doing it. Like not sort of like not sort of just like turn on myself or just like gets, flop sweat or just like be really self-deprecating. It's just kind of like take a posture of like, well, I know I sound crazy, but I like how to do it with a straight face, kind of.
I relate to that really strongly. I get physically very squirmy, and I find myself like contorting into awkward positions while I'm explaining. Shoulders crunching, spine bends.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have almost all the same DNA, so I guess no surprise that that's very much. I'm probably like tearing up the label on my beer or something. Yeah, just awful. And I think in part that's because I want people to think I'm smart and respect me and like
totally,
and that's really probably the same impetus that is why like academia doesn't study it, to some extent.
Absolutely. I had a friend ask me after one of our conversations recently, why is this making you so anxious? And when I really stopped to ask myself that question, that was the answer I came up with, that I value your opinion of me, and I like to think of myself as an intelligent person who understands the world, and I'm really scared of coming off as not that. And that's a really good thing to notice about yourself, because it's a tool to express yourself better once you understand that that's your motivation. on a broader level, when I realized a couple years ago that it was very important for me that people think that I was smart, it was like a master key to my whole personality for myself. Like it was a big revelation about just like how I behave in the world. And it's like humbling also, but like noticing that has allowed me to sort of like get off my idiot high horse about it and just like catch myself when I'm doing dumb things to like demonstrate that I know something when somebody doesn't need a piece of information. And I think that pops up in the UFO realm for me because I want to tell people like the most crazy thing that I learned right away. I want to like jump in at the deep end where I'm swimming currently, and that is bad. We can talk about that in our tips on the way out, but in a couple of these conversations, especially the longer ones, I've found that to be a major screw up for myself. Just starting with what I'm thinking about right now is like not a good way to approach somebody who's thinking about it for the first time.
I have totally done that exact thing, and also done it as a kind of like just to be like a little playful and provocative and be like, I'm going to open up by telling you about, you know, the Italian pancakes or the jellyfish or something. So, okay. So, all right. So for me, I feel the challenges are like, yeah, maintaining, like not fucking crawling out of my skin from like embarrassment or discomfort. And then also like actually succeeding in convincing people that they should be interested in this. Is there anything else, like what's your experience? Anything else that you find particularly challenging about this or that you'd like to solve for?
I agree with you that the main thing that we would like out of our friends is curiosity, and I think that's also an important thing to realize. And if other people have different experiences, then it's important for them to realize whatever they want to get out of it too. I think like if you're having these conversations with people and you're confused about why they're going so strangely, you might want to step back and ask yourself what you're trying to get out of the conversations. And it might be as simple as like asking your friend to please hold some space for you while you explain some crazy stuff that you've been thinking about. But it might be like more of an ask in terms of like inviting a friend into the curiosity. And that is my dream scenario for how this goes is you say, hey, I've been looking into this stuff. And your friend goes, whoa, what? Really? There's like interesting stuff here. I always assumed it was bullshit. Well, tell me what to read. And then, you know, you trip off happily down the rainbow road of discovery.
Mm-hmm. I think this idea of an ask is kind of a fun like it's like safe, I don't know, safety blanket maybe for me going into a conversation like this. Would be I work in the world of training, and I do training around like sales and also political conversations, like canvassing conversations. And it's really good to end conversations like that with a specific ask, like you want to have something to ask. And also it gives you like a piece of punctuation. So you could ask a friend, if it's a good enough friend, like, can I say, like, would you read an article? Will you read this article that I'm going to send you? Or will you look at this thing?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, so let's try to impose some structure here, maybe.
Well, maybe that's a good segue into our entry points that you were discussing, or do you want to talk a little bit more about how it's gone and like categorize the ways in which it's gone right or wrong?
Well, I guess what I want is to have like a 30-second and then maybe a 60-second or 90-second like elevator pitch, basically. And for me, it's of like why you should go and learn more about this. And then, you know, so with that as a goal for me, like then what I start thinking about is like what is important information to try to communicate in that? What's important to try to communicate in that short an amount of time versus what stuff do you not have space for there? So I don't know. That's it. Feel free to pivot us away from this, but I would be curious to talk with you about what are the things that you need to communicate in elevator pitch.
That sounds great. We could also try one of these live, but maybe we should start with a top level discussion of the things you'd like to cover. One thing that I would really like to get people to at level 1 is there are physical objects in the skies that we can't identify. And by can't identify, I mean all of us can't identify. Like our most advanced sensors and our most advanced scientists and military professionals can't identify. And they are objects. They're not meteorological phenomena. And then from that, I think I would like to get them to, they are intelligently controlled. And that is the assessment of professionals who work in fields like flying airplanes and commanding military vehicles, or like running intelligence operations. And then I guess maybe the next thing would be that like a ton of, okay, I was going to go to beings, but I think maybe step 3 is actually there's a ton of freaking data about this. Because for me, the big like blindfold removal, stepping into UFO world has been realizing that we have a ton of information about this. Like my previous expectation was that we had no information, and that is why we all assumed that there were no flying saucers. And once you get into it a little bit, you realize that in fact we have a ton of information, and so it becomes more confusing that we haven't, as a group, stepped into credulity or at least curiosity about this subject. And then probably the last level is, and also thousands of people have had experiences with beings, and you've got to just encounter that at some point as you move down this road, as uncomfortable as it is. And that is the area where you're most likely to lose people. So that's the area where you kind of have to be the most careful.
I love this. That's a great list. So, all right, these are objects and nobody knows what they are. They're intelligently controlled according to experts, and there's a ton of data about this. And then I guess the cherry on top, or the chaser, is this is people having experiences with entities. I strongly agree with point 1, and point 1 is basically the only thing that if I have like, that's my 10 seconds. If I have one thing to try to communicate something to people, it's that they're physical, technological objects, and nobody knows what they are. And obviously, I mean, there's tons of citations for that. Quick sidebar, I really want like a business card sized thing, with like a QR code to cite, with all the citations in it,
Reminded me of that the guy who played like Biff Tannen had one of those cards that explained himself and he gave it out to people. Yeah.
I want that, exactly. I want the Biff Tannen card. Available in our store. Okay, but I'm not sure that I agree with point 4 though. I don't know that it's worth talking about. I like in such a short. I don't know. I'm like, I could see it both ways. I could see it as like alienating people, turning them off, or like piquing interest, and as being kind of a chaser or like a teaser if you've successfully kind of built the other rungs there. I don't know. What do you think?
No, I think you're right. I sort of feel like we're looking at the 3 things that would give 10 seconds each in a 30-second. There are physical objects. They're intelligently controlled. There's tons of data. That's a good 30 seconds. And then you could say a little bit more about them to make it 60 or 90 seconds rather than adding more big claims. Maybe you would want to, like, at the end of your 90 seconds, suggest like some stuff people could consume. We're going to get to that next, like specific recommendations of entry point content. But I don't know. What do you think? Like, are there more substantive points to add to this list, or is the 30, 60, 90 just about expanding how much you say about objects, intelligence, and data?
I do think that you're right that it is. It's helpful to have some recommended research avenues as an off ramp, and just to add something on here. Like, it's almost like it's it's such a fucking weird thing to lay on somebody. It's like so intense that like you kind of want to like cushion it almost by telling them where they can go to learn more about this if they want to.
Yeah, what would you think about maybe pointing to other serious people who are interested in this?
Oh yeah, I love that idea.
So there are some pretty serious scientists who are looking into this now, like the guy at Stanford and the guy at Harvard, and there are also like 6 or 7 members of Congress who are aggressively investigating and think there's really a there. So it's going to be an interesting subject to watch. And you're out.
I kind of love that because the first 3 points they're good. They're information that I want to communicate, but they're not, I don't think, working toward my goal of convincing people that there's something here that they should be curious about. So bringing in validators like that, I think is a really good idea.
Cool. Yeah. Maybe don't even need to name them in the 60-second version. In the 90-second version, you can say Avi Loeb and Gary Nolan and a couple of the congressional UAP caucus names would be okay.
What do you think about
Tim Burchett and Jared Moskowitz, maybe?
Yeah, that's safe-ish. What do you think about talking about the U.S. government at all? Like and the idea of a cover-up or the Pentagon or any of the reports?
That seems like the hour-long version of the conversation. I'm not sure, just like with the beings, I'm not sure that you can do that in the 60 or 90 seconds because you start to sound crazy and you start to feel crazy. Also, for me, that's a point where I get like really angry and it triggers this like new emotional tone from me that is probably not constructive for the conversation. What can you give me an example short version of hitting the cover up?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would get there through the Schumer amendment to the Defense Authorization Act, the amendment that was gutted. And I would just get there, I guess, through the validators point where you're like, lots of other people are interested in this. For instance, Senator Schumer actually introduced an amendment last year that was scuttled, but he mentions non-human intelligence like 17 times and is, he seems to believe as one of the most cleared members, has some of the highest security clearance of anybody in our government, that we are in possession of alien craft, or like that's a real possibility. Obviously, I'm already over 30 seconds. This is not going well, but the Schumer amendment is so, I don't know, maybe people don't even have the context to like understand how crazy that is to have the majority leader of the Senate introduce a piece of legislation that has language like that.
Yeah, 30% of America would be like, the Senate works for the Supreme Court, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. And alongside that point, I feel like it's not worth mentioning. I don't know. Actually, I'm waffling on this, but you can sum up the Grush allegations pretty quickly. As a member of the Air Force intelligence who was tasked with investigating the UAP told Congress last year that he thinks we have some of these craft and we've been secretly researching them. So Congress is trying to get to the bottom of that. You could do that, or like,
yeah. I mean, I like how light your touch was there. It was a nice casual tone that I feel like you probably wouldn't be able to bring to a real conversation, but I would struggle to. Yeah, I don't care. Take it or leave it. It's just interesting, is all.
Right. Is there a question to ask people at the end of this, or like?
That's a great idea. Because then you can turn your own nervousness back on them.
Yeah. Well, like how? What's the spotlight to spin over to your friend that isn't just like, what do you think about this?
Yeah.
Will I ever get a job again? Oh my God. I'm sorry. Goblin mode is happening over here. That's why
I mean, you could ask like, what about this are you most curious about? And maybe the answer is no. The answer could just be nothing. But if the answer is not nothing, then it's their gears are going to be turning, and they're going to,
Yeah.
start building some pathways for themselves.
What about this are you most curious about? That's interesting. I read a really good negotiation book last year called Never Split the Difference. And one of the recommendations he has is he's like a famous hostage negotiator, this guy, and he proposes not ever asking questions where the answer can be no. So you want to like say something that they would almost certainly agree with, and that say, is that right? Or like, do I have that right? As opposed to like saying, are you curious about this, for example, where somebody could say, no, not really, because I think it's all made up. Another thing I think that might work would be, have you heard anything? What have you heard about this subject? I'm curious about what your media diet has brought to you.
I like that. I like that a lot too.
Dog Zaster. I'm sorry. Okay. All right. This is worse than I imagined. I might have to like take him to
He's making a lot of noise.
Yeah.
What a little punk.
I think that's pretty good. What about this makes you curious is okay.
Yeah. So there's I'm gonna share some more like sort of buzzy like sales methodology kind of thinking, similar to what you were just saying. Different closed concepts of how you could close a conversation that I've encountered. One is like a calendar close, where you could be like, can I talk to you again about this in like next week? Can we talk about this again sometime? Even something like that.
That's interesting.
Another is a choice. Give people a choice of two things rather than like a yes or no kind of question. So be like, if you're still interested in this, do you want to hear a little bit more about sightings, or do you want to hear about a specific really credible sighting, or do you want to hear a little bit about like abduction experiences?
Oh, that's interesting. Give them the wheel in the conversation a little bit.
And then you keep them trapped in the conversation. There's an if-then. It's the concept of like an if-then. So you could be like, if the New York Times published an article that said that Lockheed Martin had a crashed alien spaceship, would you believe it? I don't know. Maybe that's a bad example.
I still feel, and I actually haven't done this in my own conversations, but I feel like what have you heard about this subject is a really strong over to you.
I do like that.
And it's something that in retrospect, I've wished that I had tried in some of my conversations. Because my instinct is that at least for some group of person, if you give them the option, they will opt out of the conversation. My friends have ranged from like the third that's like just really trying to stop talking about this as soon as possible to the third that's like going on and just like swirling their brandy and happy to let me just have at it. No one has done what I've really wanted, which is like, where do I learn more? Yeah. But that's been kind of the range. Please talk as much as you want, and please stop talking.
Yeah, right. One other specific like question type. This would be a pretty weird one to use, I think, but maybe it could be fun. Is like on a scale of 1 to 10, like to what extent do you believe that there are physical objects in the sky that nobody knows what they are? And then when they answer and say, I'm like a 3, dude, be like, what would it take to get you to like a 6?
Yeah, this is really good. I agree. I think engaging with this on the probability scale is really powerful, especially for some of our more like technically minded friends. I know you have one in particular who's been giving you the like full brush off, and and I know that sometimes engineer brains work in probability, and they might be like more receptive to it. But you know what? I'm gonna put him in another room. I'll be right back. Okay.
The dog is so bad that he needs to be taken out of the room.
Okay, my dog is in another room. I'm sorry, that was hideously disrespectful to listeners. I apologize. I have some chew toys if he comes back. So we were talking about probability, and one thing you could do is ask a friend where this is all landing for them right now in terms of their sense of its reality. You could maybe try to pivot there by saying, like, half of Americans think that there's something to this. Do you fall in that top half or that bottom half? Maybe no. Where do you fall on the spectrum of information and belief about this?
That's what is the number? Isn't it like 57%?
56%? Nice. It's
Yeah,
probably something like that.
of Americans believe in UFOs, I think which is a weird question.
One question I've seen is believe the government knows more than it's telling us. That's kind of an easy sell.
Yeah. I do think I'm pretty convinced that in a really short version of this, it's best to avoid talking about the cover-up. Because it just gets so woolly so quickly, and yeah, and like I wouldn't even talk about if I mentioned the Schumer amendment, which I do think is really like valid and interesting and weighty. I would not talk about the idea even of crashed craft. I would just say that, like, after a lot of,
Yeah,
introduced an amendment that clearly demonstrates that he believes, one of the most highly cleared people in our government, that he believes there's something going on here.
Yeah, I agree that it's dangerous territory, and I would just say that the lightest touch way to hold it is to say something like, by the way, there's a pretty good chance that our military and intelligence communities know a little bit more about this than they're letting on. And that is, I think, the gentlest way to address that whole subject, which for me is also very thorny.
I like that a lot, because I think that when you talk about it and start trying to talk about it in depth, you can sound a little cuckoo, but actually, like, people hear it as cuckoo, but like actually most people have no trouble believing the US government and the military is lying to us, and actually they think that happens all the time. They're like very certain that happens.
Yes. So you can pair those beliefs effortlessly and stay on the side of sanity.
Yeah, if you say it the way you just did, then they just, in their internal monologue, will think like, well, yeah, no shit.
Right. Obviously. And I think that's especially true when you talk to members of the military. I think they're more likely to understand stovepiping and like classification systems, and just like the high likelihood that sensitive information would be withheld from the broader public. It feels very normal to military people, especially. Yeah.
Do you want to talk more about probability, or should I maybe pull us back to what the structure is we're kind of landing on?
I'm curious about it. I'd love to have a better question for it. I feel like the gentle way to do it in a friend conversation is, how likely does this stuff seem to you right now? But I still feel like that's a little more on the spot than, what have you heard about this? How much have you heard about this subject? Because how much have you heard doesn't require them to make a judgment. They're just like then reporting what they've encountered. Oh, like, oh, not much. I read that New York Times article, or like, oh yeah, I saw there was a congressional hearing, but I didn't watch it. And that's like nice and safe, because you're not asking them to like say what they think about something. Whereas when you get to the probability, you are putting them on the spot. So I feel like you need a little buy-in before you get to that point. Like you need them to be interested in some level before you engage them, which I guess kind of cuts against what you're trying to do, which is like get somebody who's not curious about it to become curious about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I'm not convinced that question actually does much, because they'll tell you whatever they've seen or heard, and then you're still left. You're basically exactly where you were.
That's a good point.
You just have to move on to your next thing to say, and they're not really thinking critically there. So I'm kind of warming to the question of like so you said, what what do you feel? What do you think is the probability here right now? Or framing it as 57% of Americans think that there's something going on here. Are you in the top half of the butt? Like, what do you think? Are you But then following up with a question of like, what do you think you would need to see? What would it take to convince you that there was something going on here? Or what would it take to move you from a 3 to a 6 out of 10 in believing? Not like being not convinced is probably a bad thing to ask for, actually, but like, what would move the needle for you, you know? And they might say like UFOs on the White House lawn, but they might say something more nuanced. And I think probably best of all, they might like think for a beat, and you know, and then like be spinning their wheels about like, and start building structures in their brains for like how they process this information in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. What more would you like to see? Can you phrase the question again?
Well, like on a scale of 1 to 10, how convinced are you that there are objects in the sky that we don't know what they are?
I'm like, 2, bro. I don't know. Sounds like might be weather stuff, or it could be secret government programs.
Okay, so like, what do you think could move you to like a 7 out of 10?
Like if the government told me that like they knew there were aliens, like then I'd be like, okay, I guess whatever. But it still wouldn't change how much I care about healthcare. It's probably
I guess if that's your friends.
I mean,
yeah, that's a good point. I mean,
right.
Even if you did say that, then I don't know. I guess the point then is like, well, like in political persuasion and canvassing, you're never going to convince somebody. You're never going to change somebody's mind in one conversation, and that's not the point of the conversation, really. When you're doing a persuasion conversation, you're just trying to like move them from undecided to like curious towards your field. So yeah, so getting you to a even if I got that answered from you, I don't know. That's something. I would then, I guess, just have to move on and not try to like dig in on that question more.
What's it gonna take for me to get you in one of these UFOs today? So let's move on to entry point content.
Yeah, okay, let's do that. Yeah, but I like the general thing that we've landed on here is like, we want to communicate that there are objects, and our biggest experts don't know who they are, what they are. They're intelligently controlled per X. They appear to be intelligently controlled, again, per experts. And then that there's like a ton of data dating back decades. And I want numbers for all of these, and I want to get more specific on them. And then here's some people who are also taking this very seriously, and here's some places you could go to learn more if you want to.
Yeah, and when we're asking questions, you can ask things. What about this makes you curious? What have you heard about this subject? What would you like to hear more about? What would move your needle from where it is now to a higher estimation of the likelihood that this is real? And finally, can we talk about this more sometime? Which is just like a nice way to put it down the field and then re-engage later. As you said, doesn't happen in one conversation.
Or can I text you an article? Yeah, something.
Yeah. Can I text you an article is good. And then we're going to go into this list now of like really good things to send people. If you get that, yes. If you make that sale,
this is a very
UFO.
Very.
I'm liking it more than I thought I would. I thought this was going to be a little casual banter, but this feels like an action plan
now. Great. Okay. So, okay, cool, great. So now we're going to talk about some top entry points with things that we think are really good trailheads for learning more or getting pilled. And I will say, like, for me, it really was just the point one thing that we're trying to communicate, that they're physical objects and that we truly don't know what they are. Like that, for me, when that finally really landed and I actually internalized that is true, and that unidentified meant unidentified by like the most qualified possible people you could imagine. Then I was like, what the UFO? That really is like what sent me. I just like walked around saying it out loud to myself for like a week and a half. But okay, what was your I don't know, where do you want to go? Do you want to tell me what your first entry point was that really hit for you, or do you want to tell me what you think the best entry point is for somebody?
Yeah, let's start with ours, I guess. You sort of just gave yours, although I'm curious, where did that happen for you? Like, what piece of content did you consume that made you have those realizations?
And I guess to give the shortest possible answer to this, because I've been into this subject for years in some ways and different avenues, but like the second chapter, or the first real chapter of Leslie Kane's book, which is the Belgian Air Force general talking about the Belgian wave from, I think it's 1989. Just like I went into that book being like ready to be, like being kind of like hoping to be convinced, I guess, but like that chapter just like hit me like a ton of bricks.
There's one specific thing I remember from this chapter, correct me if I'm wrong, please, which is that they contact the US government and military, right? And ask if this is like a test program by some of our like advanced DARPA tech, right? They ask about this.
I don't remember.
My memory is that they reach out and they get a no, we don't have any craft in your area answer, which, you know,
yeah,
because it's spec ops, you can't take as an absolute certainty, but it's some kind of evidence. They are an ally. Like, it's very unusual to conduct exercises over an ally's airspace without notifying them. We read each other into that stuff all the time. We'd be more likely, I think, probably to do that to ourselves.
well,
so yeah, go ahead.
Should we talk about the Kane book now, or
the Kane book is the best big thing, I think. The Kane book is also the thing that I have mailed to the most people. I've sent physical copies of that book to two of our good friends, and one of them started it. I think it helps. The foreword by John Podesta, I think, helps.
Right.
But it's the single best because it's the simplest. I think it starts like with this very clear short list we talked about earlier of goals she has to establish during the book, and then it ends with that list of like, I have established these 3 facts, and my basic memory of them is like, these are physical objects and they're in our skies and we don't know what they are. And that's like the whole book is really just establishing those 3 things, and then you can like read into it other layers of the mystery, but she doesn't go to any crazy places. She doesn't talk about beings. She doesn't talk about extraterrestrial hypotheses.
She doesn't talk about crash retrievals. She barely talks about the cover-up.
And she spends almost no time in her own voice. It's like set up and then primary source reports from highly qualified people all the way through the book. And then that great essay by the political scientists at the end about like why we might not know more about this if the government does in fact know more, or if the military and intelligence communities know more, which is a really worthwhile enterprise, I think.
It's a fantastic book. You should totally read it, even if you're already convinced that the phenomenon is real. And yeah, if somebody is willing to read a book who's a skeptic, it is a fantastic skeptic handholder. And for me,
it's called UFOs. I think like generals, pilots, and government officials go on the record, and it's Leslie Kane, but it's spelled Kean. Leslie Kane.
It's so good. And what hit me, and then we should move on, but what hit me about the Belgian wave, why that landed so hard for me, is it's like a year-long wave. So there's like hundreds of sightings. It's investigated rigorously by a government, by like a major, like advanced government. And the person that they have in charge of it is this very credible, qualified guy who I think he's like the former like head of the Belgian Air Force. He writes or goes on to like write like Air Force plans for the United Nations. Like the little paragraph that describes his background was like jaw-dropping to me as somebody coming in who was still kind of in the hayseed mindset. Was like, to be like, see somebody of this caliber, even though I was into the Fravor stuff, like this level of investigation is just not, it just blew my mind.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The head of the Belgian Air Force. It's also easy to tell that story once you've read that chapter.
Okay, that's a really long one, and let's try to not talk that much about it. And also the book, nobody's going to read the fucking book, really.
Yeah, it's true. And nobody's going to listen to this whole thing that I'm going to do next. But for me, the torchlight, for some reason, was the Lex Friedman interview with David Fravor. It's like an hour and a half or 2 hour long conversation, and probably only like 30 minutes are about the encounter. So you could hop to the time code, and I will put that time code we'll put all this stuff in our show notes, and maybe in an article about this piece. But for me, for some reason, the 2017 articles didn't set off my bunny hole investigation. They were like very cool and exciting, but it wasn't the tipping point for me, which at the time, obviously, I wasn't curious about, because I wasn't curious about the whole subject. But since then, in the last year, I've been curious about why they didn't do that for me. Like, the videos are freaking crazy. The whoa video and the like, what the hell is that thing video is, I mean, they're like nuts. The gimbal video is freaking amazing. It's really cool and crazy, and it should have shaken me to my core and made me start researching this, but it didn't. So I'm curious about why that is, but it's beyond my ability to answer that right now. But for whatever reason, listening to the long form interview with David Fravor, who's like a West Point flight commander, the closest thing to Tom Cruise in the real military, just like slowly and confidently describe this thing that happened to him, was the brain cracks like an egg moment for me. That was the like, oh shit, we're dealing with an actual thing that's like almost certainly not human, and it is technological, and that's freaking crazy. And then that is the thing that made me start like reading and listening to everything, and getting deeper and deeper into it and gathering all these details. So I guess everybody watching this knows full well what the Tic Tac encounter is like, but the very short version is this: thing comes up out of the water and like stares face to face with a supersonic American jet. I don't know if it's supersonic, it's just a high-tech American jet, and then it blasts off at an insane speed to a specific location in their flight plan, which changes every 15 minutes for Air Force security reasons. So it's like super weird that this thing got to this place, and it's super weird that it went as fast as it did. And as David Fravor said to Congress last year, this thing was like unlike anything that we're currently developing or that we're likely to develop in the next 20 years. So like, as far as he's concerned, he saw something that was not human, and it was technological, and it's on our planet. So when you do that math, all the other like, hey, maybe we'll meet a civilization stuff falls away, and you end up dealing with this idea that something intelligent is here. And I think I was at that thing is probably a drone for at least 6 more months until I bumped into some of the like experiencer stuff, which I don't think we have on our short list of entry point content for understandable reasons.
Yeah.
So we got the Kane book and the Friedman Fravor interview. You want to do the next one?
Yeah. Well, for off the Friedman Fravor interview, I would push the 60 Minutes piece from Fravor, and Ryan Graves also is in this 60 Minutes package from, I think, like 2022, maybe 2021. It's like, I don't know, it's the shorter version, it's the shorter version of the Friedman one, but you still get the story, and you get footage, and it's just like dry, just the facts. Yeah, I think the 60 Minutes piece is actually a really good entry point for maybe especially for older people.
I agree. I think it's probably the strongest short piece of content that you can send people. It's not like 2 minutes, but there is a 6.5 minute version. There's one that's like 13 minutes, and then there's a 6.5-ish minute version that it covers some slightly different territory with Fravor and Dietrich. But that's the total time footprint of it, is like less than 20 minutes. And probably the first one you'd want people to watch is the 13-minute one. It's very serious. It's framed in the 60 Minutes style. It's just like dripping with formality and certainty and official technical care. I think Lou Elizondo's also there.
Which is rough, honestly, just because of his soul patch and the fact that he carries a backpack with him. There's a shot of him like at a bus station or something, leaning against the wall.
Yeah.
Backpack. I mean, God love him, but he's the soul patch is not good for the movement. Like
it's really. But then Chris Mellon kind of swoops in and saves it with his like tall private investigator peacoat and just like certain dry voice, and I think
That's
he's
right.
done
Melon's too. I think you're right. And Grace. It really is good. I'm gonna zag and say that I don't think that there's a New York Times article that I would push actually at this point. I think those glowing auras and black money, the Pentagon secret UFO program stuff from 2017, which is arguably what started this modern like era of ufology and UFO interest. I just think that that's just old news at this point, and what that establishes, if anything, is just, or what it establishes is that the U.S. government has continued to be interested in this, and while pretending that they aren't interested in it. And I just feel like we're beyond that now. And like in the project of trying to convince somebody that they should be curious about the phenomenon, I don't know if like because the Pentagon used to have a program that has since been shuttered moves that and replaced subsequently by like 3 additional programs. I don't think that it moves that needle.
Yeah, I buy that point. I would say people should see those videos.
Absolutely.
But also the New York Times has just been really shitty about this ever since they handed it to Julian Barnes. So going to the New York Times is not a great spot. And bouncing off this, I would say the debrief article that debuts the Grush claims is actually a very good written place to start people. And if I was going to send people one article, I would send them that article because it's got the Carl Nell verification and the like Jonathan Gray super spy verification, which is shady because it's like it's weird that he has a pseudonym and works at the CIA. But there are some quotes in that that support Grush's claims in a way that sound really strong, firm, certain. I think Carl Nell says something like his fundamental assertion that there's a sub rosa arms race going on, and there has been for like 70 years to control this technology. That's accurate. That might be somebody else, but they basically people back up Grush's claims and make him sound not crazy. There's also a Christopher Mellon article, like an op-ed in the debrief that's like a written version of his soul talk. There's some pretty good quotes in it about just like how frequent these sightings are at military bases, and that's information that people are not exposed to if they're just coming into this for the first time. But I think if they're really reading their very first ever article about it, the debrief is a pretty good place to start. It's a little more detailed than that. There's that one other Hill op-ed that's like either we're experiencing a psyop or this is real, and both of those options are very strange. That's pretty good. But what do you think about the debrief article with that? Would you send that to somebody on the fence now or no?
My problem with it is that I'd never heard of the debrief before that article, and that's on me. It's a reputable publication, like
it's Leslie Kane and Ralph Blumenthal, so it's like their names should matter because they wrote the 2017 New York Times piece.
But like, I don't know. Maybe I'm just out of touch and I just didn't know it, and like that But like, I don't think
no, that's not your fault.
My dippy artist friends on the east side of Los Angeles are not reading a like national security specific blog, so they had not heard of it either. So it's like not a great article for me to send to them.
Yeah. All right, I buy that. I mean, the 60 Minutes has more authority. To that point, something that's not on our list was that Meet the Press half hour.
Oh yeah.
It's like, it's not bad. It's not great. They talked to Garrett Graff, who's just like wrong. But there's a key moment in it about halfway through where the Chuck Todd asks the interviewer who he tasked to learn about this, so what do you think? And the guy's like, honestly, I thought I was going to report on nothing here, and now that I've like done the research, I don't know what's going on. And that's like a very key moment that people should have about this. That's what should happen to skeptics who do a little digging here. They should realize, oh, there's much more to this than I thought, and now I will become curious about it. Oh God, I'm just wish casting.
Yeah.
We got the 60 Minutes, the Friedman interview. We've ruled out the New York Times article. We've ruled out the debrief article. You have this really cool website. You want to talk about them?
Yeah, this is my favorite resource, I think. This is actually the one that I would be most likely, I think, to send to somebody. It's just uap.guide. It looks good on your phone, looks good on a laptop. It's just a really very simple website that is basically attempting to do what I'm trying to do, which is make people be curious about this. And it's built almost entirely around just quotes. So you go there and you'll first read like a Marco Rubio quote, then a Barack Obama quote, then a deputy director of naval intelligence. Really short little hits of people that you know folks are going to know, saying something kind of mind-blowing. And it has it specifically divided even into these different sections, starting with UAP exists, and then they're real objects, they're moving too fast, it's not something new, it's a global phenomenon. And yeah, it just lays it out very succinctly, and again it's just like a DDoS attack of validators.
Yeah.
Oh, with citations and links too. It really kicks ass. It's so cool.
That's fantastic. Good job, UAP Guide. UAP.guide.
Yeah. These three people who just put it together just as volunteers: Brad Crispin, Haley Morris, and Austin Alexander.
Absolutely fantastic.
So
all three
cool.
of you. I wanted to ping quickly the one other thing we mentioned on our outline, which is the congressional hearing from last year, from 2023. It's long, so no skeptics are really going to watch the whole 3 hours. But if you could get them to do it by saying, click around, or like you could send them a time code to like just David Fravor saying, we don't have anything like this, and we won't soon, maybe there's something there. Plus, it's very formal. It is before Congress. It's on C-SPAN, or YouTube doing C-SPAN. So there's something to that. It's probably not the only thing that you would send somebody, but it would be on the short list of like a list of links if you were emailing someone. The congressional hearing about Grush's testimony, also featuring Ryan Graves and David Fravor.
Yeah, that's cool. It's also just cool to see like that it exists, and it's very long, and it's from last year, and it's Congress taking this very seriously.
That's a good point. I told you this offline, but there are a couple times in friend conversations where I've just shown people data just so that they could see that the data exists, not so that they could pour through the details themselves, but just so that they could mentally confront the fact that there are 800 stories, or that there were 1,000 instances of physical trace evidence. I think there are more, but another good one is just the page of people's drawings of the shapes,
Yeah. Real quick, I didn't know this before, but the UAP.guide is from some Safe Aerospace people, two of the co-founders of Safe Aerospace, which is Ryan Graves' group.
Cool.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. They seem like they're doing good work. And also probably a bunch of the stuff they're looking at is not extraterrestrial. Like there's a pretty good chance that some significant percentage of the drones photobombing Air Force bases are Chinese or Russian. And we should also know about those things. So it makes us all sound less insane to acknowledge and encourage investigations in those directions.
This is cool, man. I feel like we have a good list of like some short and long resources.
Yeah. I was thinking as a way to our outro, we could maybe mention some places not to send people. I was thinking about like maybe not trying to get people to watch like a Danny Sheehan 1.5-hour podcast off the bat, or like maybe not Grush on Rogan. Like maybe those are just like not the entry points, unless you've got like a Rogan fan, or like kind of like a deep head podcast boy or girl.
I would say maybe not also the show Encounters on Netflix. I think it's Netflix from last year, the Spielberg show. I mean, if it were somebody, I just feel like if you're gonna, they're long episodes. It's very well done. It's very produced. It's very humanizing. It's very focused on like the people in these stories. And I just kind of feel like, because it's so focused and each one is about one event and there's only 4 episodes, that it doesn't deliver the sort of like overwhelming mountain kind of thing that we both seem to think is important. And I just feel like it's easier for people to sort of wave away one event and say like, well, those 50 people were crazy.
Yeah, or that particular instance was rocket flares or something.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think I think the juice isn't worth the squeeze. I think it's a cool show and well done, but for these purposes, I think it doesn't do enough in 45 minutes for me.
Okay. Yeah, I buy that. Interesting. I like it. It's well done. And I would similarly say, and maybe even more so, that the TMZ Jeremy Corbell piece is not a good starting point because it's too sort of sensational, I think, and like energized and it's gonna push people off, I think, the subject who are not already curious. And similarly, I wanted to shout out that we both really like Richard Dolan, but he's a 200 or 300 level course, not a 100 level course, as you said. So we would not recommend starting with one of Richard Dolan's many books or YouTube shows about this, even though we, as established heads, would recommend it to you as somebody who's enjoying this subject already, as proven by the fact that you've watched us talk about this for an hour. Want to go out with some tips and tricks, some do's and don'ts for friend chatting about UFOs?
Yeah, sure. Don't talk about the mantids. Don't accidentally start talking about Bigfoot. One tip I do have is that everybody believes in ghosts in my experience. Basically, everybody has some form of superstition or paranormal belief, whether they examine it or not. So like you can find these little wedges to get in there. Yeah, I guess that's it.
Yeah, I would add to that list breakaway civilizations is too soon for that. The Silurian hypothesis of like Atlantean holdovers, it's too soon for that. It's too soon for time travel. It's too soon for interdimensional space hopping. Don't bring up any of those things. We already mentioned maybe not getting into the cover up in too much depth. Don't say the Pentagon elaborately hoaxed us with a bullshit report. Just like let them figure that out later. And I think the broader thing this goes under is order of operations. You want to start with the most universally established facts, like people see these things. Did you know that people see them at least 5,000 times a year in the United States? There are 5,000 reports. And did you know that the people who report these tend to be veterans or pilots? So that's a good place to start. And those are like observable facts. Don't start down the bunny hole. Start around the entrance to the bunny hole. And think about things in probabilities. Maybe even talk about your own opinions in terms of probabilities. Like I'm starting to think that there's like a pretty good chance that some of this stuff is in fact real or like bears further investigation. Mention other experts who are very interested in this so that they can like align themselves with these institutions that are doing more research, like Stanford's Gary Nolan and Harvard's Avi Loeb, and Congress's Chuck Schumer. And finally, we have this idea about an off-ramp, which is pinging an upcoming event. So the way this worked for me when I was having like Thanksgiving conversations last year was, anyway, Congress has this bill coming that Chuck Schumer's trying to get passed, and I guess we're going to see what happens to it in December. So that'll be a good time to circle back and talk about this more. To your point about having another conversation, this also kind of allows you to just casually back away from the subject while still promising to return to it in the future. And it gives people something to look out for in their lives as they're reading headlines, just glancing out of the corner of their eye at a wrinkle in reality that they previously ignored.
Great, man. Yeah, nothing to add to that.
Sounds good. Chung Chung, welcome back. Welcome back, puppy. And thank you for your time today, John. This has been fun, and I'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, Caleb. See you soon.
Bye.